Hey guys, it's Bella, and in this video I just wanted to show you guys some of the earliest poetry from Britain, and by this I mean the earliest poetry that was written by British authors in Latin and in English. So authors who grew up in Britain. Um, yeah, that's what it is. So this is the first one from Roman Britain because, of course, the Romans brought literacy to Britain. They had a highly literate population who wrote many letters to each other and curse tablets, as we know from uh, Vindolanda and Aquisulis, respectively. This one is my favorite out of all of them. It's really interesting. We have a handful which are poetic in nature. And this one reads, Somnio premonitus miles anc bono eiustit aram, quae Fabio nupta es nymphis venerandis. And what this means is, the soldier, having been warned in a dream, ordered this woman to set up this altar, the woman who is married to Fabio, to set up this altar for the venerable fairies, nymphs. So I just love this idea of this really mysterious, magical altar being set up because maybe the fairies suggested to the soldier, and maybe it's Fabio himself who suggested it. Really interesting. And this is an inscription from a stone altar found at Risingham. So that's the example I've chosen from Roman Britain. There are many others from Roman Britain. Here is the earliest that is after the fall of Rome. So in 410 Common Era, with the rescript of Honorius, the Roman legions left Britain, and shortly thereafter we have the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes and the Frisians coming in and settling, and they bring with them the language which would go on to become Old English. And this account is given to us by the Venerable Bede and Gildas, among other authors. And this is the first poem that I am aware of, which was written by somebody in that interluding period, because with the exception of Gildas, we don't really have very much writing from England after the Romans leave in 410 until a few centuries later in the 700s, 600s with the Venerable Bede. And with, of course, the Augustinian mission, which brought books and literacy into Britain. But here we have a poem by Lutting of Lindisfarne, and it is preserved in St. Gallen Stiftsbibliothek MS 254, page 258. And do note, although it says that it's dedicated to Bede the presbyter, this is not the Venerable Bede, because the poem above, another poem written by Lutting of Lindisfarne, which comes just above in the manuscript, says that it was written for his mentor Bede, who died in the year 681. So we know this poem has been written after then, and Bede died in the 8th century. So we know that this can't be the same Bede. It might have been quite a common name, because the name Bede, or Beda in Latin and Old English, it just means a prayer, as in a person who prays. So it's understandable that many people would have it. And this poem is interesting because it is not standard Latin poetry. It's actually showing, whereas Latin poetry was metrical based on vowel length, this poem actually alters between stressed and unstressed syllables. So if I read the first line, Gentes octo pes sunt meta dare cerneret, hisque septem sanxit esse curra calens carminum. So once again, hic legentes octo pes sunt metra dare cernere, hisque septem sanxit esse curra calens carminum. And you guys might recognize the rhythm with which I'm able to read that out, right? It's a rhythm that's somewhat familiar with us today. We still have it in English poetry today. So this is a really early, these are the origins really of poetry, which is not, even though it's written in Latin, it's not Roman, but it's English in a way. And it seems to have been influenced by Irish poetry of the same period. So really interesting stuff by Lutting of Lindisfarne. And we go on to this one now, which is a few generations after Lutting. And this is preserved in Munich Bayerische Staatsbibliothek MS CLM 8112 on folio 106V, among other manuscripts. And this is a poem at the end of a letter to Saint Boniface, which was written by the English nun Loeva, and it is probably the earliest surviving piece of poetry written by an English woman. So we can say that she was probably what we would call crudely Anglo-Saxon, although we're trying to abandon that term for various reasons. And starting from here, we have the poem. Now, this manuscript cuts off a bit of it, unfortunately. The poem is fairly standard. Oh, sorry, the poem starts here, my bad. This is where the line is lost. But the poem is not particularly remarkable. It's standard Latin poetry like the Romans would write. It's hexameters, I believe, iambic hexameters. So it says, Valle vivens evo longiorde vita feliciorde interpellatis pro me. In regno patris semper qui lumine fulget, qua iugite flagrans sic regnet gloria Christi, in lesum servet semper te iure perenni. So this is just saying to, this is from Leova. She's saying to Saint Boniface, who is out there doing his mission in Germany, farewell, be well. This is the poem at the end of her letter. Live a happier life, and I hope that you will go to heaven. So very standard stuff, but it's quite cool that we have a poem written by a woman from early medieval England. And speaking of early medieval England, I want to take us on now to talk about the Franks Casket, which is a really fascinating artifact. So the Franks Casket is an artifact that was created in the 8th century, so the 700s, and probably at a monastic center. It has writing on it in both runic script and in Old English and in Latin, interestingly enough, in the Latin script also. And it merges between the two very interestingly. The Latin inscription includes runic letters as well as Latin letters, and it has lots of these artistic scenes on it. And this one in particular is one which has not been interpreted yet. And the runic inscription I've got here for you. So it's a poetic one. It's got some meter to it, some Old English meter. So this could be, depending on how old the poem is, it could be the earliest Old English poem that we have record of. So it says, Her has sitað on Harnberga, agel driget swa hir erta gis graf sarden sorga an, sefatorna. Which means, as in, well, this is a possible translation because part of it's been cut off, but the translation would read, Here Host sits on the sorrow mound. She suffers distressed as Erta had imposed it on her. A wretched den of sorrows and torments of mind. Really interesting. So part of the reason I chose this particular side, even though there are other sides of the casket with other illustrations depicting various scenes from Germanic and Roman mythology, such as the sack of Jerusalem, Romulus and Remus, but also Wayland the Smith, etc. The reason I chose this particular side is because the myth here has not actually been identified. We don't know which of the Germanic myths, for instance, recorded by Grimm that this refers to, if any. So it might represent a long-lost myth that we don't know enough to reconstruct. We don't know all of the references and the symbolism. There's so much stuff hidden away in here. There's this almost like there's this baby in something like a crypt or a tomb or a burial mound. There's this man about to kill a horse. There are these three women here sitting around. Maybe this is a reference to the three Norns of Norse mythology. And I have a suspicion that it could be connected to this poem, which is a charm against a stud and stitch in another Old English manuscript, I believe in the Lacnunga. And this reads, Lluda wardan hi, la lluda, da hi over dan hlawridan, wardan anmode, da hi over landridan. Schild þú þei nú, þú þísne niði resan morte, útlítið sperre, ég herrene sie, stóð under linde, under leachtum schilde. Darra michtigen wif hyrra magen beradon, and he gyllende garra sandan. Ich him oterne efter wille sandan, flaurende flanne forane togianes. Now, although this poem is much older and we can tell this also by the language as well. The language of this is a few centuries older than this, which is standard West Saxon, really. And I should have translated the poem as well for you, and I will do that now. So, they were loud, yes, loud, when they rode over the tomb. They were single-minded when they rode over the land. Protect yourself now. you who have to seek this, I'm forgetting what neath is, I believe it's an abode, out a little spear, if you're therein, if you're inside there. He stood under the tree, or under the ash, I believe it's ash tree, under the shield from lights, where the mighty women advised their kin, and they sent sort of tricky spears. I wanted to send him another one, a flying bane against this man. I think that the last line I'm not too sure about, but the rest of it I'm basically confident on. And there's a lot of bits of this poem which I think we see referenced here. So, the Michtigan Weef, the mighty women, seems up there. These could be the women advising their kin. Stod under linde, under leachtum schilde, stood under a shield. This man not only looks like he's standing with a shield, he seems to be standing under a tree of some kind. And he's talking to this weird therianthropic creature with like a dragon's head. Maybe it is a dragon. It seems to have wings as well and hooves on its feet, and it's holding some kind of branch. Really fascinating stuff. And so this man could be referring to it. Maybe even out a little spear could refer to this baby inside the tomb. Who knows? There's a bird here as well. Don't forget the bird. There's all sorts of subtle interwoven symbolism here. Also, the fact that we have a horse here, right? They were loud when they rode over the mound. Maybe this is what's happening. Maybe these women have ridden the horse over this mound, and now they're advising their kin, while this man is standing here under the tree with his shield, being advised. It's really, and of course there are some issues. It wouldn't explain this figure here with the axe. Unless it's the narrator himself. I want to send him another one. I'm not saying that this poem was written for the Franks Casket or anything like this poem from the Lachnunga against a sudden stitch. What I'm saying is that maybe there are some elements in the charm against a sudden stitch which refer back to an earlier myth which you've now lost, and maybe this myth has some similarities or maybe some characters in common and some events in common with the myth that's being depicted from the depths of Germanic paganism. This is what this scene on the Franks Casket is showing. So maybe that's the inspiration in some roundabout way for the charm against a sudden stitch that we see here. So something to consider, something to bear in mind. And I want to bring you now to our last poem, which is The Dream of the Rood. It's a really, really famous one in Old English literature, and justly so. Part of the reason it's so famous is that it is actually preserved in two forms. It's preserved on the Ruthwell Cross and in the Vercelli book, which is extremely rare. Old English poems are very rarely preserved in more than one source or manuscript. And there is a plaster cast, incidentally, of the Ruthwell Cross at the Victoria and Albert Museum, which I highly recommend you go to because you can experience there some of the phenomenology of this artifact in a way that you can't from just looking at a photo, in large part because when you are standing at your regular height and you go and you walk up to it, you can't really, in most lighting conditions, make out the inscriptions that are on there. It's really difficult to read. But when you kneel down and you're sort of in prayer before this cross, suddenly the lighting pops up and you see the names like Mary and Christ and you see the inscriptions. It's beyond fascinating. This cross, incidentally, has two sides. One side, which I believe is the side that's facing us now, depicts humans. It depicts biblical characters like Jesus and Mary, and it has inscriptions in Latin with references to the Bible, including. But this one may not be a reference, I should say, to the Bible. This is the only non-biblical thing we have here. This is an archer shooting at a dragon up there, and this might be a reference to the Germanic dragon-slaying legends that we have. The other side, however, has the Dream of the Rood poem written in runes about it. And although you can't see it in this transcription here, on the art in this blank space here is full of the natural world of animals and such. So the Ruthwell Cross is is a tool that was used in the 7th century for converting pagans to Christianity, which had a really profound message that the old English Germanic world with this mysterious Elder Futhark runic alphabet was associated with the natural world and with the decay associated with it in the Christian understanding. And on the other side, the Latin language and script is associated with Christ and with humanity and with civilization, really, on the other side of the cross. It's absolutely fascinating stuff, but it's still containing both in the same artifact, and it's appealing to both sides of it. And the poem itself, although written in this runic script, is Christian. And that's why it's so fascinating. Not only is can we see that this poem was therefore much older than the Vercelli book of the I believe 1100s or 1000s. The Vercelli book was written. We can tell that the Dream of the Rood is much older than this Vercelli book because of the Rothwell cross dating to the 7th century, and it preserves older linguistic forms. So the runes up here read Christ was on Rodi. Christ was on the cross. And if you'll note here in the Vercelli book, the manuscript actually reads Christ was on Rode. And this E is not as changed from the I earlier on. There's the I, I'm hovering around it now. And this is a feature of older Old English, if you'll forgive the awkward expression. And so this shows us that this poem seems to have lasted through the ages. It seems to have been quite common from the 7th century all the way to the 11th, when it would be written down in the Vercelli book. And so this may itself well be one of the oldest poems that we have surviving in Old English. And in addition to being the oldest, it's a very evocative, powerful poem, which I highly recommend you guys all check out. So that's actually the last poem that I had to talk about today. I hope you guys have enjoyed this brief excursion into the poems of the earliest poems that we have surviving from Britain. I should also give an honorary mention to Aldhelm, who wrote some of the. He's one of the most prolific poetic authors of early medieval England, but he's not as early as these other writers and poems, so I didn't cover him. So, to go quickly from start to finish, we have some poems from Roman Britain. We have Lutting of Lindisfarne with his poem in honour of the Venerable Bede, which is written in this. It's certainly not written in a Roman metre, it's written in a more English metre. We have a poem in Roman metre written by the English nun Loeva in 732 Common Era. We have the Franks Casket with this mysterious pagan poem with its possible relation to a much later poem. And lastly, we have the Rothwell Cross, combining the pagan and the Christian into one in a really powerful tool for the conversion of England. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you want me to talk more about any of the particular poems, maybe give a full translation of them, because I didn't fully translate all of them, feel free to ask me in the comments and I'll get that done. So otherwise, thank you guys for watching. I've got more history content coming up on this channel. There's going to be videos on poems by Enodios and Gothic lessons, various other things. I'm going to be getting back into doing more history. I don't want you guys to think that I'm only doing political and discourse related stuff now. So keep your eyes peeled for that. I also want to let people know that I have a Patreon account now, and I'll do a more proper video talking about it. But the TLDR of the Patreon is a way basically for you to get tuition from me. If you want me to teach you Old English or Latin or Gothic or Middle English, or paleography, manuscript skills, any of these things that I'm qualified in, you can sign up on Patreon, and you'll also get certain privileges, like I will do transcriptions for you, I will do other things, etc. So that's an option for any of you who have been inspired by my channel and maybe want to learn the languages. You can sign up to my Patreon and get tuition from there at a lower than market rate. My tiers on Patreon are about half of what would normally be charged for Latin education, maybe a bit less than half. But it's because I want to give back to my audience as well in the form of tuition, as well as you give to me. So anyway, that's if you have the spare means and you want to support the channel, the Patreon will be linked in the description below. But no pressure, nobody has to do that, and do not do so if you in any way do not have the means to do so. And I'm grateful to all of you for watching and for commenting, even if you disagree with me, and enjoying the videos. So I'm rambling, but I'm going to stop now. So thank you guys so much for watching the video. Have a great day. Bye.